Good evening, everyone. My name is Kim Dorman. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library, and I am delighted that you all came here this evening, whether you're in person in our community room or on Crowdcast. The event will be about an hour with the opportunity for audience members, whether you're in person or online, to ask questions. We just ask that for those of you who are attending in person, that if you have a question, you raise your hand and wait for either Paula or I to bring you the microphone, so that it's easy for everyone in the room and beyond being Crowdcast, serial place, to hear your questions. A few housekeeping notes. I'd like to quickly mention this room is T-Coil enabled. So if you have a T-Coil enabled device, please feel welcome to switch that on at this time. And please join me in welcoming Artistic Engagement Manager, Paula Alexander of McCarter, who will introduce this evening's event.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim. Good evening to all of you here in the community room and all of the folks joining us via Crowdcast. It's so great to see you out live, humans. And I'd love to begin by grounding tonight's event by acknowledging first that we here in the community room gather tonight on the land of the Lenni Lenape. We honor the Lenape and all indigenous caretakers of these lands and waters, the elders who lived here before, the indigenous communities of the Lenape diaspora today, and the generations to come. And I must say, what a pleasure it is to be here. I have anticipated this evening, Sarah Rasmussen, and members of our community for the last 2 years, to be able to have the opportunity to speak with Sarah about her work as a director, as the Artistic Director of McCarter Theater, and to launch her directorial debut. So it is finally that time, and I'm so happy about that. I'd like to also express gratitude to Kim and Janie and Becky of the Princeton Public Library and to the leadership here at the library for continuing to be amazing community partners with McCarter through the dark days of the pandemic and into the future. Thank you for making this live opportunity and this hybrid opportunity available to all who love theater. So thank you so much for that. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank everyone here in our live audience for your understanding and benevolence in donning the KN95 masks to keep not only our creative team here safe, but also the company of Ride the Cyclone. It's very much appreciated. So thank you for that. Just a little word or two about tonight's format. Sarah and Mark are about to take the stage with me. I've prepared some questions for them, and we will engage in lively conversation for about 30 to 35 minutes. No pressure, it will be lively, I know for sure, having spoken to both of you. And then we'll turn it to the audience questions, both here in the community room and on Crowdcast. And then we'll wrap everything up around 7:55, just before the library closes, and we're going to get you two off to bed so that you're ready for a rehearsal tomorrow. So now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome up to the stage, the library stage, Artistic Director Sarah Rasmussen and Music Director Mark Christine. Thank you. Oh, they're over there. I just want to mention that choreographer Jim Lichtscheidel had intended to join us this evening, but had a personal matter arise, and he sent his apologies, but we also send him our very best. A quick word about these two amazing artists sitting with me. Sarah Rasmussen is McCarter Artistic Director. She assumed creative leadership of the theater in August of 2020. She is a director, a producer, and teacher of directors, as former head of the MFA directing program at the University of Texas at Austin. Prior to joining us here in Princeton, Sarah was the artistic director of the Jungle Theater in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where she commissioned, directed, and produced new work. She has many directing credits and awards and honors, and I'd like to highlight just one. Sarah was an inaugural recipient of the Bold Theater Women's Leadership Circle grant which is gifted to artistic directors who have demonstrated both artistic excellence and commitment to their communities. And how grateful I am to be boldly led by you, Sarah, and you are
Likewise.
but also to have you here in the community of Princeton. So thank you for joining us tonight. Sarah Rasmussen.
Thanks.
She is joined by her collaborator, Mark Christine. Mark is a New York-based music director, actor, vocal coach, and a nationally recognized college audition coach and professional coach for Broadway, national tour, regional theater, and television performers. Mark has worked as a pianist, keyboardist, arranger, musical director, and orchestrators in theaters throughout the country, including the Jungle Theater. Mark's acting credits include the Broadway first national tour of Waitress. He is the first music director to grace the live at the library stage, my friend. Mark Christine. You are, yes. So, Sarah and Mark, before I ask you about your history as collaborators and your work together for Ride the Cyclone, I am a lover of theatrical origin stories. And so, I'd love to hear from both of you about first being exposed to the form, bitten by the radioactive spider, as it were, and what was it that made you as an artist know that you wanted to pursue work in the theater?
You want to go first, Mark?
Sure.
I
Yeah.
don't know this story about you. This is going to be a little bit.
Lively conversation.
Yeah,
It's already
you know.
beginning.
We came to the library.
You're gonna know each other better now.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I actually grew up in a football town in Ohio that did not have a lot of theater. And when I remember like fifth grade, took a trip to Toronto and saw a production of Phantom of the Opera. It was my first show. When I was in 8th grade or 9th grade, I took a trip to New York and saw Beauty and the Beast. It was my first Broadway show. And so I'd seen a couple things, and then I honestly got roped into doing a theater production my junior year of high school and kind of fell in love and never looked back. And I grew up as a musician, so I from the time I was 3 had been playing anything keyed. And so I always had an interest in both the music side as well as the performance side, which led to my very unique path, which I went to school for musical theater, but I built myself a minor in music directing, and pretty much from then on have always managed to juggle multiple concurrent careers, you know, as a performer, as a music director, as an educator and coach. And so that's how I find myself here all these years later.
That's wonderful. May I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
What made you think music director even at that young age?
Kind of a strong suggestion. I was like, I bartered a lot with being able to play piano. So you were like, oh, I can teach you this if you would accompany me or play for this class. And so I very early got roped into like being the piano guy. And from there, it was like, oh, there's always a piano guy in every production who teaches the music and leads the band, and that's kind of cool. And it went from there. And so I found that I really appreciated that from that perspective, I could not only tell the story of one character, but help influence the story of all of the characters. And I really view what I do as musical dramaturgy, you know, and it's helping serve a director's vision and working in collaboration with the director to story tell, you know, through kind of the sonic lens and how we use sound and music and all of that to help advance story, advance character. That little nexus of things is what I find really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah, how about you?
Let's see. I also grew up in a town that loved football. I grew up in a small town in South Dakota. And my theater origin story is really one of necessity. That I grew up in this town. It's about 2,000 people, and the kind of main part is like as a teenage girl, my mom was a English teacher, and she took me to see Shakespeare plays. She took me to see a Shakespeare play at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, and I just super fell in love with it. And it was a really incredible, very visual director named Garland Wright who directed it, and I just thought, yes, that is what I want to do. And then just, you know, by necessity started doing it because there weren't like school plays or things like that. And I mean, the interesting thing with like I've been reflecting on with musicals is how much I loved musicals as a kid, and especially like I loved Sondheim. I had a cassette tape of Into the Woods that I just listened to over and over and over, and I loved the wordplay of it and all that. But honestly, like musicals just felt like, God, if I was in a small town where there weren't even plays, like musicals felt like beyond, like sort of like I will never touch that in a way. And I got to see a couple Broadway tours, once I was in high school or things like that, and I just felt like that's so amazing because it just fires on so many cylinders that you have like the lyricism of it and the movement, and you can do stuff visually in musicals that you can't even touch in plays. And I think it always just felt like sort of far away from me. And there's oftentimes like sort of musical theater kids really get routed into like that's its own thing, and then plays and new plays and classics are kind of something. And honestly, it was working with Mark that kind of really helped me make the leap of like, oh, as a director, I can find my way into this, even though it wasn't, necessarily where I started. I started with said Shakespeare and new plays, and but over the years too, I've realized it's all music, right? Like Shakespeare's music, comedy is music, beautiful, contemporary playwrights that write with a sort of poetic quality to it. It is all, I think, at the end of the day, a musical impulse of sorts.
You've intuited the next question, which was how the two of you got together. You're already giving Mark credit to sort of allowing you authority to, not authority, but for permission to work on musicals. How did the two of you run into it?
I'm trying to remember. So I cast Mark's wife is a really wonderful actor, Lena Klingerman, and I cast Lena in a show.
Yep.
And I think that just
I feel like originally you were planning to do Fly By Night, which was a musical that we worked on together in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And I think originally it was like, do you guys have interest in like being in this? And I was like, I'm actually really interested in music directing. I think that's actually how
I found out
conversation started.
Mark was a music director, and I think there's just those collaborative moments where you're like, that seems like a really good, solid human who, like it was just kind of an intuitive sense of it. I think that we had spent a little time just socially together, and I thought, yeah, that's. And we have worked then on these musicals that are not the super traditional like revival of it, but more of almost like a new play musical. And like Mark said, that really requires a lot of dramaturgy and sort of figuring out how do we get from here to here. And Ride the Cyclone is definitely one that needs strong designers and a strong music director, because it was sort of in a way like an unfinished piece that really needed a strong hands, I think, hands in many ways of like, how are we shaping this?
So, Sarah, where did you first encounter Ride the Cyclone? Did you see it in performance?
Yeah,
or?
I did. A couple of people had told me, Sarah, there's this piece, Ride the Cyclone. It was a kind of sleeper hit in Chicago. Shakes that had come down from Canada, and a wonderful Broadway producer, Kevin McCollum, was doing it in Chicago, and then they moved it to New York, and friends of mine said, you would love this piece. And so I went to see it in New York. My daughter was about 5 months old, and I flew to New York, and like the dead of like this like tiny human that I was trying to get from. And I dropped her off at a friend's. She'd like never been to a babysitter. I was like, I gotta go see this musical. And I did, and I loved it. I loved the work that they did on it, that team. And I also felt really compelled to like, I have to work on this as a director. I love it so much. It really activated my imagination. And so then I kind of through a friend of a friend of a friend figured out how to get to Broadway producer Kevin McCollum, like knocked on his door. The assistant's just like, who are you? And I sat there like drinking like 3 cups of like cold coffee. Finally he comes out and he's like, who are you? Why are you still, why it's like 6 o'clock at night? Why are you in my office?
Is this on the same trip?
Yes,
Oh
later,
God.
like later that day, the next day. And I was like, I would love, I need to work on Ride the Cyclone. And he was like, this is like a story out of central casting. I'm a Broadway producer, and he was like, how many seats? What's your weekly gross? And I was like, okay, it will make no sense because I have 150 seat theater. And he was like, 150 seats, like that makes no sense. And he was like, it's not finished yet. It's not ready to go into the world. So for 3 years, I hounded Kevin McCollum. Just every couple months or every time I was in New York. And finally, I think I just wore him down. He was like, all right, well, then just take the rights, do the show. And then he flew out to see it in Minneapolis and really, really loved what we did with it. And I think, in many ways he said, it's not finished, it's not finished. And we said, let us have a crack at it, because people like Mark can, there's something beautiful about something that's not finished, because then you can say, oh, that's for that's where actually the design tells the story, or that's where Mark's work is. It's not all story has to be told just through words. And I think this piece is so beautiful because it really offers this palette for designers to paint and paint the keys, all of that.
So Mark, could you play the scene with Sarah when she got back from her trip and she told you, about Ride the Cyclone? I'm imagining that there was a conversation, or how did you first encounter it? Was it through a conversation with Sarah? Did you read the book?
Yeah, I mean, I knew of it. I actually had friends who had done it. One of my wife's best friends was in the New York production. And so it was kind of on the radar, but I actually didn't see it. And so I knew of it very kind of ethereally. It was out there. And I honestly think the first real conversation I had about it was with you about, I think it was still trying to get access to do this thing, and then eventually Kevin has agreed. Kevin has said yes, and it was like, okay, we talked about it, and I think a big part of our collaboration has always been about like just what's kind of at the heart of this. What's the story at the heart of this? What's the pitch version of it, so to speak, just in terms of like conceptualizing what it could be. And I think I remember having a conversation just about what this play was and what it meant to you and what you were excited about it and in it. And I was able to get some of the materials to look through. And this is often part of our thing is it's like, cool, I don't want to hear like what somebody else did with it. I want to see like what it is on the page, right? And go back to in the same way that I think with a play, right? You want to go back and just look at the actual text and say, what is this?
Yeah. And Mark did some really smart stuff with that. There was a piece, I won't tell you which one, that the producers were always trying to cut from the musical. And they're like, this song doesn't work, this song doesn't work. And I was like, Mark, they keep telling me this song doesn't work, but like, what do you think? And like Mark said, he doesn't go back to like, well, what has everyone else done? And he would start to noodle around with it. He's like, I think if we took this approach to it, and I built in a horn section here, and really found sonic and musical ways to reinterpret some of the music in a way that I think really surprised people who'd seen it before. They were like, oh, that actually feels like a different number.
There it is. That's how that works.
Wow. So sort of Mark's totality of abilities sort of actually fed.
Absolutely. I mean, at one point I was like, I think it's more Prince. And you were like, yes, let's go in that direction. Let's, Mark is so quick at doodling around it on stuff. Yeah.
So Mark, actually, as you can see, intuited my next question.
So intuitive.
This is what's wonderful working with two pros. You know the questions as they come, and I didn't even share them with you. But before I ask them to share with you sort of what your elevator pitch is to tell people about this musical that's really hard to tell people about. You sort of have to experience it. I did want to ask, in terms of Maxwell and Richmond, the creators of the original piece, Jack McCullough just said, go do what you will, and do you work in concert with them?
Now we are, which is interesting. In Minnesota, the piece had, they worked a lot on it, and like I said, they were like, oh, it's not finished, it's not it's not good enough, and I said, let us just take a crack at it. And I was running a really small theater in Minnesota. We didn't really have the dollars to fly in writers and all of that. And so we just kind of went at it with our own, own interpretation. But now it's been fun with this version. I am in touch now with the writers, book writer and the lyricist and composer. And we are tweaking things. It's kind of, I don't know that we intended that, but I think because they're curious about what we're doing, we are, there is a character in the play that was based on a friend of theirs who had ALS, and in this version, we have cast an actor with disability, and it's the first time an actor with disability is playing this character, and that is bringing up new things in the text. We're learning a lot from this actor's experience of what it is to embody a character with an authentic experience of disability. I'd say so. That's opened a really wonderful channel of communication, and they are now working in tandem with us to adapt the script. And I think that's one of the really fun things as a director to say, okay, the work that is happening in Princeton right now with this cast will forever impact this piece that a lot of theaters in the country want to do right now, and that feels meaningful because it's a lot of work and effort and labor of love to make a show. And for me, that's always most meaningful when I feel like what we're doing can have a longer range, conversation and effect. And I think also the writers are very curious, like, how does it land in 2022? Like, a lot has happened in the last 2 years on so many levels, and I think it's a comedy, and I think humor in this time is really, really necessary, but it's also delicate in terms of what do we laugh at, what's maybe feels too tender to laugh about right now, what just isn't funny after the last 2 years, and so I think that's a delicate balance, and one we're navigating every day.
And I think it is important to know, and I should have noted this in my original question, is that this piece originated in Canada.
It did.
And it was about 10 years ago.
Oh gosh, yeah, I think it was actually even maybe 15. It started in Canada. It was started as a cabaret, so a series of songs and kind of these characters that were based on people kind of the writers knew, and then interstitial dialogue, and then it grew. It actually started, though, this is like, the writers may have been talking about this, it started in the basement of a Ukrainian church in Canada, and there is a character who is Ukrainian, there is a Ukrainian folk song in it, we've cast a wonderful actor who's first generation from that part of the world. When we cast this show, Ukraine was kind of in the news in the way that, like, it is so a part of our larger consciousness right now, and so that has been really a navigation to say, how do we honor this culture in a way that's respectful, and also be aware of just how present it is, and so yeah.
Let's turn to Mark and give him the really challenging, and then you can wordsmith them after. Mark, it is a very challenging musical to describe.
Okay.
Here is your audience. You've crafted your elevator pitch. What is Ride the Cyclone, or what story does it tell?
6 kids die in a roller coaster accident.
That's not a spoiler alert.
No.
We find that out on page 2.
That's page 2 of the story. And the show is essentially set in a TV, to be interpreted however you care to read it, but a limbo space of sorts, a liminal space of consciousness, and a fortune teller machine, one of those like Zoltar machines, Karnak, comes back to life and creates a game where they have to compete to see who is going to be allowed the honor of going back to life on Earth. And each student kind of has their moment to share what they think makes them the right person to go back. And I think what it speaks to, and I think what I find really beautiful in the piece is we discover that through this experience and where they all are, I think all of these young people come to a truer and closer to a full expression of their like full and real selves. And so while in life they might have had their insecurities, they might have had their differences amongst their peers, they find this kind of genuine acceptance and honoring of each other in this weird game that is posed. And I think through that discover perhaps that they are all kind of the connective tissue between them, what unites them, but also being able to see each other as individuals in a way that perhaps they were unable to within the confines of life. It was a long elevator.
Let me tell you, you nailed it, 100%. Is there, I don't even think there's anything that we can add. That's perfect.
And it's a comedy.
And it's hilarious. And it's very funny.
It is. It's elaborate at
funny.
times.
It's very heartfelt and very moving in terms of. I think it really asks this question about what is a life well lived, and looking back on their lives and being their true selves, just what. And I think that's I know, like at first the premise of it, where like 6 kids died on a roller coaster. I remember my mom being like, I don't know if I want to see something about death. And I said, but there's this interesting thing about how death on stage is actually sort of generative and life affirming in a way, in that we in the audience get to remember that we're alive, and we're watching the story of people being like, oh, what was meaningful about my life and what really mattered. And I think that allows us to reflect of like, oh, the lights come up, oh, we're still here, we get to go out and make those choices. And I think that, yeah, it's there's a real life affirming joy to it at its heart.
I wonder, I'm going to turn to Mark and ask him sort of to share his insights on the nature of the music and the songs in the show and how they contribute to character.
Yeah, I mean, probably more so than any show I've ever worked on, I think this score is incredibly diverse in terms of what musical genres and styles are represented. And as an expression of each student has this kind of moment of their moment to say who they are, so to speak. The music ranges from 40s French cabaret, burlesque inspired sort of thing, to 2000s bubblegum pop, to a kind of 90s rock that has a throwback to like the Jackson 5, to auto-tuned hip hop, to like it is all
Something
over.
for everyone.
Yeah.
It's all over the map in a way that you hear that and you think there's no way this can be cohesive, and it manages to be cohesive. And I think it's a testament to the writing that it truly is an expression of character. You know, that each person has their moment of like, this is what I want to say. If I've got one chance, this is what I'm going to say. And I also think that there's a musical journey that we go on that you see in context of kind of, again, I think kind of getting closer and closer to truth. And I think that's really interesting to explore. So it's very eclectic.
I wonder if you both have your own favorite number from the show, and if you might share just a tidbit of that, so when members of the audience end up seeing the piece, they'll be able to reflect on the experience of hearing, like, oh, this is Mark's song, oh, this is Sarah's song. You don't have to have a personal connection to the song, but what is the song that you're like, oh, I can't wait?
Oh, it's so good. I mean, there are like truly, and I don't mean this as a cop-out, there are so many really great ones. I think probably my favorite musical moment is the Ballad of Jane.
Oh.
I think it's a kind of almost operetta inspired that thing that starts in this very floaty, kind of haunting lyric soprano place that ends up in like a New Orleans dirge. It's really interesting and cool and fun, and juxtaposes like this kind of like brassy, trombone-y, dirty kind of New Orleans heavy jazz sound with like a coloratura soprano happening on top of it. And it's just a really musically exciting moment in addition to what's happening physically on stage.
Yeah. There's some crazy tricks happening, but those are spoilers, so we can't talk
We
about.
won't spoil that.
We can't talk about what happens on stage, but I think it's safe to say you'll never see a soprano sing a high note doing what you'll see her doing. You gotta come find out.
While we're here also, Mark, you're not just playing the piano in the show, you are also a member of a band. Are we able to talk a
Oh
little
yeah,
bit
there's a
about that?
band backstage.
Because you just described sort of really complex, interesting sounds. Who do you have with you?
So we've a 5-piece band. There's a drummer, a bass player who also plays an electric bowed cello upright bass sort of situation. We have a guitar player who plays about 5 different guitars in the show, and then 2 keyboards that run everything else. And so there is a lot that happens between those 2 keyboard books. And truthfully, the last time we did it, it was actually arranged differently. It was 1 keyboard and then a bunch of things that were pre-recorded. And in the pandemic, the writers decided to update it. And so now it's all played live. And so there's still some things that happen in addition to the 5-piece that is happening live. So like literally there's moments where like one of the keyboards hits a key and like roller coaster noises happen. It's like, it is very sonically eclectic and not just, it's not just music per se, but it's sound and how that influences the songs that it's stacked into.
And you will be playing live music and you'll be on stage as well, is that correct?
Just off stage.
Just
yeah.
off stage, okay.
You won't see us in this one. We'll be waving from the wings though.
Okay. cheering everyone on.
Yeah.
So the 2 of you collaborated on the jungle production of Ride the Cyclone in fall of 2019. In the spring of 2019, the COVID shutdown occurs. A month later, Sarah is announced as the new artistic director of McCarter Theater. And then in August of 2020, time is lost on me. You came and became the artistic director. Your return to the rehearsal room has been delayed 2 years, and you've been back in the rehearsal room for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
How does it feel to be back in the room? And what are the joys and challenges of staging a musical in the current COVID moment? And Mark, feel free to.
It's emotional for people. I mean, for many of us, it's the first time back since the pandemic.
First time working
in a rehearsal room. It's such a young cast. They're playing teenagers. They're not actually teenagers. Most of them are, kind of right out of college age, but so many of them had their own studies interrupted by COVID, or certainly the beginning of their career very interrupted by COVID. So I think we all feel this like immense gratitude to be back, but also it's a lot of feelings, and sometimes some very real anxieties about like, oh, okay, it's been a minute since I've done this before. I think what's very present in the room too is all the conversations we've had as a culture, as a field, about what kind of art do we want to make now? How do we want to make that art? So it's a very full moment in that respect. But I also, I think we all feel great when we can just play and remember that feeling of play and joy and music and young artists running down the hallway being goofy, just like musical theater kids. They never take a break. If you put them on a break, they just harmonize in the corner together. They're just kind of their own breed that way. So it's been very fun to feel that energy again. Absolutely.
Yeah. How about for you, Mark?
So it's interestingly, this is my second time back, but first time back music directing post-pandemic. I actually was in the Broadway company waitress in the Omicron wave.
Wow.
So that was exciting. I got to make my Broadway debut in November, and then, but it was a totally different experience, right? Because it's in that situation, I was going in to replace somebody. And so it's me in a rehearsal room with stage manager and the dance captain. It's like, oh, just learning the show and getting up to speed, and then you go in and do it, and then you're doing show every night. And so this is the first time really being back in a rehearsal room where it's fully collaborative, and it's partly like riding a bike, right? There's some of that like, oh, right, I know how to do this, and there's other things that are like, oh wait, why did I do it that way? I think there's actually been this kind of, the perspective on it has been really nice, because there are things where I'm like, oh, I could do this better, or I could do this more efficiently, or I could do this more creatively or more fun, or also I think re-examining a piece that we've worked on before is an interesting process with a new cast and many new designers and in a new space, and it's an opportunity to re-examine and really go back to like, what is it that we want to be doing here? What story are we telling? How do we want to flesh this out and fill this? And so, yeah, it's a whole mix of things, and there's the like anxieties and like day one, it's like, am I going to be okay? Do I know how to do, like, am I going to like let somebody down in some way? And also being able to like, creating a space where we can have a conversation and say, I feel insecure today. Cool, that's okay. And to also not feel like you just have to push through, which I think has been kind of the status quo for my whole career as an artist until very recently. And so I think it's a lot. It's a lot of different things going on, but it's really joyous to have that sense of just collaboration and play and a piece that like I really love, and I genuinely love working on. I'm really excited to get to re-engage with it and get to put it up here and see you all there. Yeah.
Just from a health perspective, are you rehearsing with masks on? Are you testing?
We're not. We have a very rigorous testing regimen. Everyone's PCR testing 3 times a week right now. COVID is still very much with us. We've had a couple actors out. And it's one thing to get a mild case of COVID and work from your laptop at home. It's another thing when your job is to go learn choreography. So as Paula said, like, thank you for wearing your mask. You know, like
Yeah.
my fear is, whoa, if I get the kids in COVID, I'm out of the room for 5 days or more as a director, and that's sort of like a sobering, you know, reality. But you know, we've also, I think it really engenders a spirit of trust of like, okay, if you know, if that happened, we would find a way to move it forward. But I think that adds to the spirit of gratitude every time I get a negative COVID test. Okay, one more day, at least, you know, how much can I get done today? So yeah, it's a funky moment for the arts because while a lot of the world has returned to normal more, it's just, you know, I mean, the Waitress, so many Broadway shows are shuttering again now because if you get that wave in a cast, you don't have enough understudies to just keep going. It really takes the show down for a period of time. And that's scary. And that's on my artistic director hat. I was like, oh, it's a lot. And it's actually, I think it's emotionally a lot right now I kept telling myself, okay, for sure by Ride the Cyclone, we'll be out of, you know, I've told myself so many times, like, oh, but for sure by that show, we won't still be dealing with, you know, the weight of this and the politics of this and the, you know, but.
So, I want to make sure that I leave, I do have many more questions of my own, but I don't want to hog Sarah and Mark. So I'd love to privilege the audience's questions now, but I also carry my own just in case, because I do have a few that I want to ask. So coming out into the audience, and when I say audience, I mean both here in the community room and folks joining us on Crowdcast. Hi, Crowdcast. Hello. Any questions? Katie.
I'm curious about, I was surprised about how quickly it passed through the mask. That's exciting. I'm curious to know how you have updated or adapted or changed the parts of the script that may not be like 2022. I know you mentioned that you have a new actor playing a part and you have this Ukrainian character. So I'm curious about the discussions of how you go about changing it. Is it based on what the actor is saying? Is it like with your dramaturg? I'm just curious about how you navigate adapting it.
Yeah, some of both. You know, some was our instincts of like, oh, that doesn't sit quite right, or let's, you know, one off the top of my head is that the script said the Ukraine, and now we, you know what I mean, like it's in our consciousness just to simply say Ukraine. But so things like that, and then other things are in collaboration with the actors. I wouldn't say the script has changed drastically, but there are, you know, there are things in dialogue. And certainly musically too, you know, just continuing to adapt. And one thing I love about Mark's work too is he really fits things. He's such a good coach of young people, of like kind of situating and fitting things to people's voices. And I'd say the same thing is true with the acting too. You know, it changes to what's the representation of who's playing that role and how that dynamic shifts as well. So, yeah,
Kim has a question from Marley, who's joining us online.
Yep, thanks. So Marley says, hi, Sarah, big fan of the show, and I can't wait to see what you do with it. Do you have any favorite moments or Easter eggs the audience should watch out for? I know in a show like this, the small moments are just as important as the big.
Oh, that's a great Easter eggs. You know, I think for anyone who's a theater fan, there are some fun Easter eggs. One is a play that's very near and dear to my heart, Thornton Wilder's Our Town. I think it has a deep connection with this. I think the writer was very inspired in part by the story of Emily Webb, and there's a character called Constance who has a really beautiful section of the play that I think really brings up Our Town connections for me, which is of course very special at McCarter, being that Our Town premiered at McCarter on just like the opposite wall that we're on. So I think it's just a neat thing for me that you know, pieces, I think in theater there's pieces that are in conversation with each other. Certainly things are, you know, inspired by other works of art, and there's some, I think, fun Easter eggs that way in terms of inspiration.
Musically, I would say there are a lot. I mean, just like a lot of nods to things, and so yes, and I would say there's going to be some in songs, there's some like samples and sound like things that happen that you're like, oh, was that okay? You know, like, and so I actually I'll let you discover them. But there's a lot of quoting, I should say, where it's just referencing something or using it as kind of a jumping off point. And so there's a fair amount of that. And I think there's something like sound cues as well, where you're basically like, is that Mario? Mario Brothers? What was it? Like,
That's a
like
great Easter egg.
Yeah.
I love that.
So great stuff like that.
Kim, you also have a question from Jane.
Yes, it seems like the set would be difficult. How is it being handled to give the ambiance of a roller coaster, the prairies, and all the other things you have going
Yeah,
on?
our set designer, Scott Davis, is really wonderful. It is a complex set, and I have to give a shout out to the production team at McCarter. We've gotten to work around the country at a number of different theaters, and the production team here is unbelievable. So the set is, it's like as if a carnival had gotten packed away and put in a warehouse. So Easter eggs all over of like, what does that look like? Pieces of the roller coaster track, pieces of rides, carousel horses, you know, you're not gonna get bored with the set. It's like playing Where's Waldo? And then the production team is having a hilarious time putting in aspects from other McCarter shows from the past. So I was like, why does that? And they're like, it's a joke. It's from this. I was like, okay, great. You'll have to show me all around the set and why that is there. And so, yeah, I think it's all about that imaginative play space where something can become a lot of different things. There's a lot of video and film projection that kind of helps take us to different worlds, whether it's a Parisian street scene or, you know, a rap concert. It's just like so many different worlds show up on stage. There's a lot of mechanical stuff. There's a turntable that moves. There's secrets, things that show up.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you a question, sort of related, definitely related to design. That fantastic imagination is required, and all of your visual designers working together. As you said before, you're really sort of using integrated design to tell the story in a way that maybe it might not be told by another director. Could you say a little bit more about how you like to work with designers and about sort of your approach to collaboration?
Yeah, that's a good, I guess I like the kind of pieces where my version of it is not going to look like a different director's version of it. You have to make your own version. You know, it's not like, well, it's in this apartment and it's got a couch and a sink. You know, the still displays are good too. But like, I love the kind of thing where it's like, we have to really imagine this unique to our situation. So I do love working with designers. I really believe in designers as storytellers, and that design, the visuals of a piece, it's true, like picture is worth 1,000 words or more. And what I love about visual storytelling is we can all see the same thing and go on the same ride, but we can see something different in it. It can mean something in kind of a poetic way, the way we can all look at the same painting and we can come away with a slightly different feeling that's personal to our own experience of life. And so I do love this design team. They're just like really an A team of incredible designers that we're so lucky to have here in Princeton. Like Gigi Chang is a Tony-nominated lighting designer who's doing all these big Broadway shows, and she's coming out to light this. And you know, it's an exciting opportunity for me to get to work with this like incredible caliber of designers now that I'm here at McCarter. And yeah, so I think it's fun to think about how we all carry a story, and almost like musically, like when do lights take the lead, when do projections take the lead, and how do we've been talking about like we ultimately want it to feel like when you're watching it, you're like, was that a lighting moment, or is that video, or is that the set moving, or is that, you know, like that it all is in concert with each other, and that's my favorite part is collaborating. I'm not the kind of director who's like, do this and then do this and do this. I love being in a room where I can have a larger storytelling idea, but then see what other people bring to it and layer on it.
Wonderful. Mark, do you sit in on all the design conversations as well, and anything that especially strikes you?
Some, yeah, not all, but I it's my belief that the music and the soundscape is just as much a piece of that fabric as the lighting, and so I think it's helpful for me to know what's going on and for them to know what's going on from the music side. And so, yeah, I think they all speak to each other very, very strongly. I mean, I have obviously the most collaboration directly with the sound designer, because that's the person whose job is literally to, in addition to building the soundscape for the entire show, that's also the person who's going to help take what we're doing in the pit and on stage and then make that into something that happens in the house. And so that's, especially when we get to tech, you know, that's a place where, again, thanks to the wonderful resources in McCarter, like we actually have budgeted that, like, I have people to be in the bandwidth, so I don't have to be all the time. And so to be able to like go out and actually get to be in the house
That's
and be
cool.
able to hear it and in collaboration with sound design, make sure that the actual musical landscape is portrayed the way that we're trying to make it do so in the rehearsal room.
Yeah.
Which is very exciting, you know, and it's not a luxury that I normally get in most regional theater gigs. And so that's a really exciting moment for me.
I do wonder, I just want to point out, once again, I didn't stop to note it, but Mark, I think you are channeling Karnak, because you intuited a question that I was going to ask, and I decided to delay it. But what is it like for the two of you as collaborators and friends to revisit this work together? And what initial conversations did you have regarding this production and the work that you wanted to do, or the approach that you wanted to take, sort of not in response, but in a different vein from the previous production? Or is it all still the same?
All the same.
Yeah.
I think it's, as a director, it's fun to iterate a show because you get to try it and feel it with an audience and learn from it, frankly, and then go back and do another draft of it in a different way. I don't know how you
It's a little bit like a painter doing a study, right? It's really cool to have the opportunity to have done a version and then explore it again. And I don't know that, I can't say that I came in with like an agenda to do it differently. I think it's more about who do we have in the room? Like, at least with my process a lot, it's okay, so you are now the actor playing this part. Like, what does that mean for you? And like, how do we tailor this to you in the same way that we would get a nice suit tailored to something? You know, like, how do we make sure that it feels authentically yours? What ideas do you have? You know, there's a lot of collaboration there. And so I think in some ways, like, there are big picture vision ideas, but there's also a lot of being willing to just discover it and to trust. And I think that's a big part of our relationship at this point. Is like, I trust that we're going to walk in a room and we're going to find something. You know, and I believe in having, if you get the right people in the room, you're going to find the version of it that makes sense for those people. And it's a leap of faith on some level, but it's also, you know, I also have a lot of like big picture ideas that were thrown away on day two. You know, we're like, oh, I really want to explore this, and I'm like, nope, no longer does that matter. Like that's not the thing for this. And so I think a little bit you prepare for lots of possibilities. You want to come to the plate creatively charged and have a lot to say, but then also be able to stop and listen and say, okay, what do you think this is? And to be able to play ball from there, which I find really fun.
Wonderful. I have one last question. I'm trying to decide which direction to go because I had like multiple questions based upon, I had a great conversation with you, Sarah, the other day that was made into sort of like program and website material. I do encourage you, if you're going to the Ride the Cyclone webpage, to check out the extended version. In it, you said many profound things, frankly, that I definitely want the audience to have the chance to reflect on. And one of them actually came about, and I don't expect you to have the same answer that you have, but came about from sort of asking you to respond to the thematic question that you've already expressed in tonight's conversation, and that is that you see the thematic question of Ride the Cyclone is, what makes a life well lived? And I sort of put that to you and Mark. It's a hard question to ask. I know those philosophical ones always are, but I know you've thought about it. I wonder, Mark, if you have, and what would you share on today, this particular day? How would you either answer that question or talk about sort of how you see that question in relation to the play, musical?
Yes, and.
Yes, and. No pressure. I said Sarah's answer was profound, but we're
So
not.
I just hold me to that standard. That's okay.
Yes, yes.
No, I mean, I think that the play, where it interfaces with the play, I mean, I find the play to be quite profound in the sense that I think you get to the end, and as Sarah has expressed, which I think is exactly the experience I've had interacting with audiences, but also getting up after playing it, is I love that you get to the end of the play and you get to go home and you get to go live your life and you get to say, okay, great, what, like, it's just personally, like the last couple of years have been a lot, and you know, been through a lot of things and a lot of reflecting on life and what it is and what it means to be alive and the idea of living versus just being alive. And I think that the play speaks to that, and certainly for me, it speaks to that experience of like, what do you? I don't know that there's an answer to the question of what makes a life worth living, but I do think that asking the question is the pursuit. You know, and for me at least, that's what it feels like. I think it might change based on the day, but that idea of, you know, really asking the question, and I think play does that. It's you leave the theater thinking about, oh, yeah, I love that song, and that moment was beautiful, and how did they do that? But also like, you want to like go have a glass of wine and like talk? You know, I think it forges that kind of human connection moment that to me ultimately, I guess, if I had to boil it down to one answer, it's that sense of like communication and human interaction and being able to see the world, like really see it.
Yeah, that's really cool, Mark, I think.
Do you want to?
I mean, that's the Artom question is, you know, for those of you who know of, we're in the very profound third act of Artom, where Emily Webb, who's a young woman who passed away, is in a graveyard with other people from her community who had also passed away. And she has this sense of like, I feel like I could go back. I feel like I'm close to it. I feel like I could still go back. And the stage manager character is like, you can. I don't, you know, and other people are like, I don't know if you should, you know, and she's like, I want to go back. I want to go back. And they tell her like, okay, well, pick just an unimportant day because it'll be important enough to you. You don't have to pick the most important day of your life. And she goes back to a birthday when she was like a preteen, and she's watching it all go by, right? And her mom's moving so fast and her family's moving around, and she just stops and she's like, just look at it. Look at what you have right now while you have it. And she just, and it always catches me, I'm sorry, but she goes back and she's like, do real people know they're living their lives? Really know it while they're living it? And the stage manager says, the saints and the poets, they do some. And I just think like that is a major artistic question to ask of like, how do we know we're living our life while we're living it? And I think this piece, like that is so at the core of it, of just like, just take a look around and all the mess and anxiety of all of it, like look at what you actually have. And that feels like both poignant right now and also kind of timeless to what it means to be human.
Thank you both so much. I just so appreciate the last hour with you. Thank you so much for coming to be witness to this, and I hope that if you haven't already purchased tickets that you do join us for this really moving production. I hope you think about this conversation when you're leaving. Please tell your friends. There's also still more of the McCarter season to go with Jazz in June and a few other things. But thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for so much.